Hi everyone! So this week is our first week focusing not on one of Wilde's plays, but rather on his prison writing. If you remember several weeks back when we discussed Oscar Wilde's biography in one of these lecture videos, Wilde was imprisoned for 2 years for acts of gross indecency. During that time, he was also sentenced to hard labor on a treadmill. It was the most severe punishment that could be given under late Victorian laws, though the judge who sentenced him thought it too light, saying, "It is the worst case I have ever tried. I shall pass the severe sentence that the law allows. In my judgment, it is totally inadequate for cases such as this. The sentence of the court is that you be imprisoned and kept to hard labor for 2 years." In this short lecture, I want to discuss a little bit about the history and theory behind prisons, as well as provide a short discussion of what prison would practically look like in Victorian England. To start with the history of prisons in the Western world, there's always been the idea of prison as a place, but for much of history, prison has been more a matter of containment than a matter of punishment. For severe crimes, public punishment and execution were often the most common punishments, and prison was often a place to hold people in the meanwhile. Michel Foucault recognizes torture at the heart of these punishments, knowing in his work, Discipline and Punish, that the rhetoric of the acts was that, and I'm quoting here, "it assured the articulation of the written on the oral, the secret on the public, the procedure of investigation on the operation of the confession. It made it possible to reproduce the crime on the visible body of the criminal. In the same horror, the crime had to be manifested and annulled. It also made the body of the condemned man the place where the vengeance of the sovereign was applied, the anchoring point for manifestation of power, an opportunity of affirming the dissymmetry of forces." That's the end of the quote. So in the late 18th and 19th centuries, though, public opinion turned away from these sorts of public displays for a few reasons. One British Victorian writer noted that after the French Revolution, the nature of more liberal democracy was to want a system of discipline that would be less arbitrary and better regulated. One might also think that the nature of the large metropolises that were developing throughout the 19th century meant that governments desired a more systemic nature of regulating criminal populations. Prison systems were designed in which criminals received punishment for their crimes not through single instances of public torture, but rather through time served in hard labor. It might be noted that even though these prisons were separate from the outside world, they still contained the same elements that Foucault notices in public torture: the desire to regulate, watch, and inflict punishment on the bodies of those who did not conform to social expectations. The idea of the ideal prison was of interest to late 18th and early 19th century thinkers. One thinker in particular remains well known for his prison design. Jeremy Bentham was interested in creating the most efficient prison, being able to watch and regulate as many criminals as possible with the fewest number of prison workers. He designed the Panopticon, a prison design that depended upon a ring design for the cells and a door window design that would allow someone to look into the cell without the prisoner knowing whether or not they were being watched at any given moment. Bentham theorized if someone did not know whether or not they were being watched, they would automatically assume and act as if they were being watched at all times. That way, a single guard could watch several prisoners. While the Panopticon itself was never built as designed, the concept was incorporated into Millbank Prison, one of the large prisons in London, and reports show that this kind of design and the way that it made prisoners feel as if they were being watched always had significantly detrimental mental and emotional effects. Throughout Victorian England, though, even if the Panopticon did not fully exist, the idea behind it and some of these other prison theories did. The importance of surveillance, of punishing the body as payment for crime, and of using prison as a microcosm of various forms of power that existed in Victorian England: legal, medical, and religious. Oscar Wilde's days in prison consisted of a few things: hard labor on treadmill devices, meals of hard bread, exercise that consisted of prisoners silently walking around in circles in the middle of a yard, and isolated time in a prison cell, for most of that time without books to read or paper to write on. Wilde's place in society did afford him a little privilege in prison, as we see him describe in De Profundis, and one of those privileges was that he petitioned for books, paper, and pen. With these tools, he wrote the letter De Profundis, which we will read next week. When Wilde left prison, he moved to France, and although he did not write much, what he did write focused on the need to reform the prison system and the entire philosophy that fueled its existence. This week we are reading and discussing the Ballad of Reading Gaol and Wilde's letter about prison conditions. In response to this lecture, I want you to consider how Wilde proposes reformation of the prison system through his writings, especially in light of what I've discussed over these past few minutes. On Thursday, we can discuss this further, but I also want to discuss how these writings show a continuation of, evolution of, or change in Wilde's thinking from the works we read earlier this semester. That's it for the lecture. Have a good week, and as always, let me know if you have questions.